2019 Hong Kong anti-extradition bill protests June 12 protest. Early stage. Fresh round of protest resumed on 12th of June, the day of the resumption of the second reading on the extradition bill. Prior to that, a general strike were called on the day in which hundreds of businesses closed for the day, and numerous workers went on strike to protest against the bill. The Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions, CITIC, appealed to workers to use your own method to request a day off to join the protest. Its affiliate, Hong Kong Cabin Crew Federation, also called a strike. HSBC, Standard Chartered and Bank of East Asia closed some central branches. Some of the banks and the Big Four accounting firms had agreed to flexible work arrangements for staff. Hong Kong Jockey Club shut down 3 of its central betting branches, citing employee safety. 50 social welfare and religious groups also took part in the strike. The Hong Kong Professional Teachers Union, CITIC, called on its members to attend a protest rally after school hours on that day. Student unions of several major higher education institutions, including the Chinese University of Hong Kong, Hong Kong Polytechnic University, City University of Hong Kong, Education University of Hong Kong, Hong Kong Baptist University and Hong Kong Academy for Performing Arts, also called for student strike on 12th of June. The Catholic Diocese of Hong Kong urged the Hong Kong government and the public to show restraint, and the administration not to rush to amend the extradition bill before fully responding to the concerns of the legal sector and the public. A Facebook post called on people to enjoy a picnic at the Tamar Park next to the government headquarters on 12th of June attracted close to 10,000 responses from people promising to attend, while the Legislative Council Commission announced the closure of the protest zone outside the building and limit access to the complex under Amber Security alert beforehand. Sit-ins took place from the morning and larger crowd built up at the MTR exit. Around 8 a.m., the crowd rushed onto Harcourt Road and blocked the traffic. Lung O Road and surrounding streets were also blocked by the protesters in a scene reminiscent of the 2014 Occupy protests. A banner-written majority calls on Carrie Lam to step down and withdraw the extradition bill. Defend One Country Two Systems was hung from the Admiralty Centre footbridge. Around 11 a.m., the Legislative Council Secretariat announced that the second debate on the extradition bill had been delayed until further notice. Violent clashes. Police vans carrying anti-riot police began to line up in a chain along the Hong Kong Academy for Performing Arts and the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Centre for standby around 1 p.m. A source in the pro-Beijing camp said that some pro-Beijing legislators were at Central Police District headquarters, while online groups have called on protesters to block white coaches and other vehicles that might be used to transport the legislators to the Legislative Council. Around 3:20 p.m., protesters on Tin Hua Avenue began to charge the police barricades and were responded with pepper spray. Some protesters at the junction of Lung O Road and Tin Hua Avenue broke through the barricades and took over Tin Hua Avenue after anti-riot police walked into the government headquarters, leaving a special tactical unit alone at the scene. Protesters outside the Legislative Council also attempted to charge the Legislative Council building. Riot police responded by firing tear gas, beanbag rounds and rubber bullets, even to the mostly peaceful and armless protesters in the surrounding area. Protesters were quickly dispersed. Commissioner of Police Stephen Low declared the clash as a riot and condemned the protesters' behavior. During his announcement, Low used the Cantonese term for disturbance, but a police spokesman later clarified he meant riot. Chief Executive Carrie Lam sided with Low's claim, calling the protests dangerous and life-threatening acts that had devolved into a blatant, organized riot. Police charged at protesters, pushing their line about 50 meters eastward on Harcourt Road. Protesters stood their ground on Harcourt Road and remained in a standoff with the police on the road. Many protesters took shelter in the buildings nearby as more tear gas was fired. The police cleared Harcourt Road and advanced on protesters. As of 6 p.m., 22 injured people had been sent to public hospitals. Around 6:20 p.m., the Legislative Council Secretariat issued a circular saying Legislative Council President Andrew Leung had called off the meeting. Protesters remained in the streets outside the CITIC Tower in Central, Queensway outside Pacific Place Shopping Mall and the junction of Arsenal Street and Hennessy Road in Wan Chai into the night. In Central, private cars were mobilized to block Connaught Road Central while protesters chanted "Scrap the extradition bill" from the Exchange Square Bridge. The number of protesters dwindled after midnight as roads gradually reopened. As of the end of the day, at least 79 people, aged 15 to 66, including protesters and police officers, were treated in hospitals for injuries suffered during June 12 protest. Around 150 tear gas canisters, several rounds of rubber bullets, and 20 beanbag shots were fired during the protest clearance. Overnight, 2,000 protesters from religious groups held a vigil outside the government headquarters, with some singing hymns and joining in prayers. Various trade unions, businesses and schools also vowed to stage protests. The Hong Kong Professional Teachers Union called for a citywide strike for a week. At least 4,000 Hong Kong teachers followed the call. Siege of CITIC Tower. The police were criticized for its handling of protesters outside CITIC Tower, a commercial block on Tim May Avenue adjacent to the Legislative Council. Videos surfaced after the protest depict the police firing tear gas at both sides of Lung Voi Road at around 4 p.m. According to the Civil Human Rights Front, the police agreed to a peaceful demonstration within that area in its letter of no objection. The police action forced protesters in the middle have no way to go but to rush into CITIC Tower amid the chaos. Hundreds of protesters were screaming and coughing while rushing into the building, which only had a central revolving door and a left-hand side door open. However, by mistake, the door was rotated in the opposite direction and further driven out the crowd. At that moment, the police fired another 2 tear gas canister into the trapped crowd. The video also showed some protesters failed to break the other locked door in order to rescue the stuck crowd. Pro-Democrat legislators criticized the police action, which might have caused a stampede. Tell me, under which police rule, can you shoot tear gas canisters at people who are retreating? Legislator Joseph Lee asked Secretary for Security John Lee. Amnesty International also criticized the use of tear gas at the trapped crowd. Tear gas may only be used to disperse crowds when violence is widespread, and only where people are able to leave the area, Amnesty's report states. It may not be used in confined spaces or where exits are blocked or restricted. It also stresses that tear gas canisters should never be fired directly at a person and clearly audible warnings must be issued prior to their use. People must be allowed sufficient time to leave the scene. Police brutality. Pro-Democrat legislators condemned Carrie Lam and police for clamping down on a largely peaceful protest with excessive force. Andrew Wan of the Democratic Party condemned the government's action. The government and police have gone crazy. How much more blood does Carrie Lam want before she can finally agree to call off the bill? Democratic Party Chairman Wu Chi-wei said the response by the authorities was not proportional. Wu himself was seen in an online video repeatedly shouting, "I am legislative counselor. Who is your commander?" at the police front lines, as a tear gas canister goes off near to him who had almost no protective gear. Many videos went viral online show tear gas canisters being fired at peaceful and armless protesters and even reporters. Another clip shows a protester apparently being shot in the head with a police projectile. Amnesty International criticized police for what the rights group calls excessive force against demonstrators. Director Tam Man Kay condemned the ugly scenes of police using tear gas and pepper spray against overwhelmingly peaceful protesters as a violation of international law. She added that tear gas and rubber bullets are notoriously inaccurate and indiscriminate, and can result in serious injury and even death. This excessive response from police is fueling tensions and is likely to contribute to worsening the violence, rather than end it, Tam said. On 21 June, Amnesty International published a report of its team of experts on policing and digital verification examining in detail footage from 14 instances of apparent police violence, that included brutal beatings of protesters, multiple rounds of tear gas fired at hundreds of trapped protesters outside CITIC Tower, hitting the head of a protester with a suspected rubber bullet, firing 14 shots of suspected pepper liquid against a man who posed no threat, dispersing journalists who had made their identities clear to the police with batons, blocking emergency ambulance to pass through and so on. The Amnesty stated that the use of force by police in the largely peaceful protest was unnecessary and excessive. The use of force during the protest violated international human rights law and standards. Some Special Tactical Squad, STS, members who were accused of police brutality were also found. No identifying numbers displayed on their uniforms. Secretary for Security John Lee said there was no space on the uniforms of STS officers to display their numbers. However, photos from media outlets showed STS officers always displayed their numbers on their uniforms during the 2014 Occupy protests. the 2016 Mongkok civil unrest and as recently as the June 9 clashes. Chief Executive Carrie Lam and Commissioner of Police Stephen Loh have been dodging the questions over the police excessive use of force or the protesters' demand of establishing an independent inquiry into the policing of the June 12 protest, only insisting the Complaints Against Police Office, CAPO, an internal police force body, and the Independent Police Complaints Council, IPCC, of which the members were appointed by the government would look into any complaints filed. Assaults on journalists. The Hong Kong Journalists Association, HKJA, said that the police trampled on reporters, and that the police has ignored the safety of the reporters. They complained that the police have unreasonably interfered their work with flashlights and by dispersing them. A driver for public broadcaster RTHK was hit by a tear gas round and was sent to hospital after his heart stopped beating for a time. The HKJA added that some police officers has insulted them with foul language, called them trash, and shouted to them reporters have no special privilege. A police officer, among several who had been accused of targeting journalists, was captured on camera yelling "Report your mother" at a member of the press, a variation of a Cantonese profanity. Another online video showed a foreign journalist shouted at riot police, "You shoot the press," as they were firing tear gas towards reporters. Riot police persisted and continued to fire another round of tear gas oblivious to the foreign journalist. On a police press conference on 13 June, many reporters wore reflective jackets, helmets and gas masks in protest of police brutality against frontline press. The HKJA filed the complaint with the Independent Police Complaints Council, IPCC, claiming police caused bodily harm to 26 journalists during the protests. Hospital arrests. At least 4 protesters were arrested at hospitals while receiving treatment following clashes with police earlier that day. This raised concerns over the confidentiality of the patients. On June 17, Legislative Councillor for the Medical Constituency Pierre Chan presented a partial list that disclosed the information of 76 patients who were treated in the emergency ward of a public hospital on 12 and 13 June with a note on the top left corner of the document read "for police." Chan said such a list could be obtained through the clinical data system in some hospitals without requiring a login and accused the Hong Kong Hospital Authority, HKHA, for leaking patients' data to the police. The HKHA denied the accusation, stressing that it had never authorized anyone to print the patient's data for police officers. The Hong Kong Adventist Hospital in Tsuen Wan also reportedly refused to treat an injured protester and advised the person to go to Yan Chai Hospital before reporting him to the police. The private hospital told media that its protocol prohibits it from handling cases related to criminal activities, adding that patients involved in such cases are referred to a public hospital.